From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi again. Welcome to the show. We're all just so proud to be Chicagoans today. A CNN contributor just called Chicago the Mogadishu of the United States. Hey, that was after 13 people were shot in one incident the other night in Cornell Square Park. So what to do? Well, nobody really has a clue, but imposing mandatory prison time for illegal possession of a firearm is one of those ideas. In fact, it's the idea that's being pushed by our police superintendent, our mayor, so it must have some merit. Or does it? We'll talk about that, I hope, if we have time today. It was the week that brought us an unrepentant Beavers and a cardinal who's still trying to clarify what his boss, Pope Benedict, has been saying to the media. So we have a lot to talk about today. And in addition to all of that, we just found out that on Tuesday, R.J. Vaneco is going to stand trial for the death of David Koschman. And that will be early next year, which ironically is just right around the 10th anniversary. Can you believe it? The 10th anniversary of Koschman's death out on Division Street. Everyone thought this case would just go away. Certainly the police and the prosecutors and perhaps RJ's uncle Rich, who just happened to be mayor at the time. But a band of reporters and editors over at the Sun-Times just wouldn't let go of the story. And today, we're going to pay some tribute to the journalism and the journalists who kept that story alive. One of them is Chris Fusco, who's joining us here today. Back again. Happy to have you, Chris. One of the original writers of the first of the Koschman series of stories. And it's going to be really interesting to get your take on what's going on. And my old buddy Andrew Patner joining us from WFMT.
Great to be here, Ken.
Always.
And great to be here with Chris. He's a hero.
I agree. It's always nice to have someone from WFMT here to class
we
up
class
the show.
it up.
Yeah,
right.
Wherever they go, they just automatically make it a classier operation. So, Chris, it is 10 years since that nasty incident out on Division Street, and I thought that. The thing about this story is that it has come out so incrementally over such a long period of time that when we get to the point where we were the other day, that Koschman goes or has a trial date set in February, right? Next February?
Yeah, Vaneco's trial is set for February 18th.
I'm sorry, Vaneco.
That's okay.
The Koschman trial, Vaneco's trial is in February. What happens is, we see that we're looking at the picture through a drinking straw. It's like we're not seeing this whole interconnected political story that you guys have been giving to us over the last couple of years. So I thought we'd have you come in and just kind of like start at the beginning and retell this story, because I know that a lot of people are saying, I've heard this before, but you really haven't. It's such a fascinating story of Chicago.
Sure. I mean, and the two reporters who I've worked on this primarily with are Carol Marine, who obviously needs no introduction, and Tim Novak, who was the reporter that that broke the hired truck scandal along with Steve Wormer. And for Tim, this story is really an outgrowth of hired truck. If you look at 2004, as this was going on, the Daley administration was really under siege like it's never been before.
Absolutely.
People are getting indicted in hired truck. There's story after story each day. And in the middle of all this incident happens on Division Street, and it merits a couple stories in both papers. It's marketed to the news media as this was kind of a fight, and nobody really knows what happened, and a kid ended up dead, and nothing to see here. Nobody really knows what's going on. There's not enough evidence. Yeah. And I think, I was covering state government at that time, and Tim was on hired truck, and I think it really always gnawed at Tim that we were never really able to know what went on here after kind of the dust settled. And he went to Nancy Koschman very early on when he was doing a story about the next generation.
The mother of the boy who
was killed. When he was doing a story, I think, 06, 07, about the next generation of the Daley family. Because it's like, well, RJ is part of that generation, so let's see what she has to say. And she just didn't want to talk to him about this, and kind of shut her door. And the impression that he had of Nancy, and the impression that she since has admitted to us was correct, is that she was so overwhelmed by everything that had happened, she just really didn't know how to deal with it. And you fast forward, we get some changes in the way the Freedom of Information Act works in Illinois, and in 2011, January of that year, Tim files a FOIA looking for all the reports on the Koschman case. And that gets us now back to the incident, because we're able now to learn many things right off the bat. The case is still open. Well, that's not what the story said no for. How is the case still open? Now the case is being reinvestigated and re-reviewed. Well, how is that happening?
But pause there. The case is still open and being reviewed. Isn't that largely because all of a sudden the case heated up again because somebody dropped a FOIA at the front door of the police department?
Well, the police department did admit, Jody Weiss, who was the police superintendent at the time of this, admitted that it was Tim's FOIA that really prompted them to wonder why this wasn't closed. And that was the mission of the police department, was to figure out what had happened. And ultimately the police department did close it March 1st of 2011. And what was interesting when we finally got all the paperwork after it was closed is that the conclusion in 2004 is we don't know who struck Koschman on the street that night. If somebody did strike Koschman, they did so in self-defense. And the sea change between 2004 and 2011 is that the police concluded that Veneco, in fact, did throw a lone punch that struck Koschman, and that caused Koschman's death 11 days later. But they stuck to the sense that Veneco did so in self-defense of both himself and others in his group that night.
Maybe you can remind us of the height and weight of the two gentlemen.
Sure. Veneco at the time is 6'3", 230. He looks every bit of that when you see him walking into court now. And David Koschman was 5'5", 125 pounds.
And also, just in case there are people who've decided to stay with us and don't really have a clue what we're talking about, R.J. Veneco is the nephew of
former Mayor Richard
Daley,
right,
the son of his sister.
Right, son of
And
Dr.
the R.J. is Richard J. for his grandfather.
Right. And his parents, his father is a prominent physician with Northwestern Memorial Hospital.
Had some nice billing issues.
That was you've read those stories.
Oh yes, yeah.
Over the years.
And his big brother is the brother who had the infamous sewer cleaning service with Rich Daley's son.
Exactly.
The next mayor of Chicago.
Right.
Probably right. Yeah.
So I guess as you just to briefly walk folks back through the incident, because I think sometimes this gets lost on people with the way it's characterized. You've got this political melee kind of going on at City Hall in 2004, and on the morning of April 25th. 2004. There's two groups walking down Division Street. David Koschman and his four friends had just been out leaving a bar after drinking. They were planning to go to a Cubs game the next day. And R.J. Veneco and three of his friends, two of them male, one of them female, are walking eastbound on Division Street just west of Dearborn. The two groups meet. There are words exchanged. The police report has an account in there that David Koschman flicked somebody's glasses in the other group, not Veneco's. Words are exchanged, and according to the police account, years later, a single punch is thrown. Koschman falls back off the sidewalk, cracks his head, and dies 11 days later at Northwestern Memorial Hospital.
So the thing that is really important to me, and a major reason why I wanted to bring you on today, is that this is a story about journalism.
Sure.
This is a story about having veteran reporters employed in a long-standing, long-term, established newsroom with a sense of history of stories who won't let go of a story.
Right.
Because one of the, and I'm sorry, I'm just preaching here for a moment. You have to let me preach for a couple seconds.
Okay, I'll let you preach.
Because
I'll try to illustrate your point.
One of the biggest problems that we have as a culture and a society today, and certainly in our industry, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, is that we have no institutional memory. That our institutions, our newsrooms, are being decimated. That more and more they're being populated by younger people who are not going to be around for careers the way our generation was. And these stories have no legs in a newsroom that doesn't have guys like you and Chris and Carol sitting around saying, I wonder whatever happened to that thing 7 or 8 years ago. Well, that is so critical.
I mean, I don't think age is the only issue. Obviously,
I didn't mean to say it
stories
was.
when we were very young, but it's a combination of the historical memory of the institutions in the city or the state or the nation, and also the institutional memory within a good newspaper,
Right.
a sense of how to do reporting, how to do investigation, how it was done before, and what the ethos of your publication or your broadcast operation is, and that's also, you know, the various owners of the various papers now, they have very little interest in that.
Well, and I guess to buttress that, you know, I'd like to consider myself maybe a protege of Tim and Carol. I'm a little younger, although my hairline doesn't show it. But they've taught me about relentlessness and putting things into context. And I guess that's the thing that I've always admired about Tim and Carol, both on the stories, the relentlessness with which we were all pursuing.
So
it.
they kind of did for you what Chuck Nicodemus did for them. What
Sure, I think that's a very
the
fair-
previous generation
Yeah,
of
right,
relentless.
right, yeah.
But that
folks
said,
did.
what that relentlessness uncovered was that, you know, less than 24 hours after Koschman is struck, with the knowledge that he is in critical condition at Northwestern in a coma, this investigation ground to a halt, and the cops went on vacation.
And there's this scrawling on the back of a file.
that came
right?
later, right? That file that was missing included a scrawling that said "V. Daily, Sister Son." Again, but these things all took months for us to pry them open. The lineup photos, you know, lineups are supposed to be done, you know, in a way where people are similarly shaped and sized. But in the Veneco lineup, it was unbelievably perfect. You know, all these guys were big, dressed alike, to the point where, you know, it would be pretty difficult, you know, nearly a month later, in a layman's opinion, to identify Veneco. Number 4, why do we need a lineup to begin with if only one punch was thrown? You know, the relentlessness with which we pursued the friends and their kind of chilling accounts of, after reading the police reports for the first time, saying that's not exactly what we told them. All of these things are a compilation of years of reporting, and you know, you really have to look at institutional knowledge. Jim Kirk has continued to back the story at the Sun-Times with relentlessness, and Don Hayner trusted us, you know, our former editor, at a time when I think we were under a lot of fire. And you go back to the scrawl, the V. Daily, Sister Son, that story didn't make the front page, and I think it came out about a year and a half into when we were doing all this. But when people saw that note, it really did resonate with people. And you know, that leads us to the special prosecutor being appointed last April, Dan Webb getting involved, and you know, before you know it, now we've got a trial of Veneco. Now we have this 162-page report that's sealed, which has its own issues.
Right.
Sealed until after the trial. Is
Sealed
that
until
right?
after the trial. And you know, when you read between the lines of that report, you can interpret it 2 different ways. You know, obviously the veneer of all this is the potential for a cover-up. Has anybody proven that yet? No. You know, has anybody been charged? Now we know that there won't be charges. So,
But it won't be charges, Dan Webb said, at least in part, maybe in totality, because the statute of limitations has run. So there's an implication, at least, or it's not an unreasonable inference, that he did find some sort of illegal activity.
and that's the debate right now. If you listen to Nancy Koschman's lawyers, they read between the lines of the report and they take your stance on that. And
They read between the lines of a report they haven't read.
well, yeah, but they read
okay.
between the lines of the statement,
right.
the
Just
public
wanna make it
statement
clear
that
that
Webb
nobody
put out.
has
Nobody
signed a
has,
report.
right,
Is that right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Very true.
As she said, if I could only just read the first 4 pages.
First 4
pages.
pages, maybe
Yeah.
she could sleep better.
Yeah, yeah.
On the other side, you have Dick Devine, who told my colleague Dan Hilopoulos, you know, hey, I don't read it that way. You know, I was before these guys, and nothing I can see here back in 2004 that indicates the statute would have expired on anything. So we're left in this kind of gray area. What Webb has said publicly is that the report is so potentially explosive it could impact Veneco's trial. So we're all just kind of, you know, and you know, the person in this, you know, you look at R.J. Veneco walking in here nearly 10 years after this happened, one, you know, drunken incident. And, you know, at this point, the story isn't really about him. It affects his
That's a
life,
very
and
good
it's
point.
never really
Right,
been about
right,
him. It's
right.
been about justice and trying to, and whatever happens at trial, it's good to know that the system, you know, is letting the trial play out. We're going to know, and if he walks, he walks, and if he's found guilty, he's found guilty. And that's the system did. The system worked finally.
I think, though, that there are aspects that make this case about not so much him, but about the larger world that he belongs
Absolutely.
to. Because, I mean, you have to see this also, I think, in parallel in time and event and journalism with the torture cases, with John Conroy's work on the torture cases, and now with our printing money every week to pay damages, because it's a question of entitlement. We have never heard a word, if I'm correct, from the former Mayor Daley about this case, right?
Other than a statement saying he was going to let the process play out.
Right, but I mean, it's not like he said, you know, this is just a terrible thing and something happened and my heart bleeds for Mrs. Koschman. Nothing like that, right?
Bill Daley did say a tragedy all
Yes,
around.
he did
He's
say-
been kind of
he
the
did
family
say that.
spokesman
Right.
on this.
Right. And then we have Emanuel a couple weeks ago or 10 days ago offering an apology for something he had nothing to do with in the torture. We've never heard a word from Daley on this. And you have this sense that there's still this idea that we're this untouchable circle of people, and that why would you want your son, your nephew, your cousin to flee the scene from an incident like this? Why wouldn't you want to see justice happen early on and let the guy move on with his own life? I mean,
And one of the
maybe I'm projecting too much, but I really see that same feeling that you don't bother with the police if the police are doing what we had asked them to do or what we had turned our heads from. Otherwise, you screw them out of their overtime pay, or you harass them in other ways.
Right. I have to say that one of the richest ironies in all of this is that if R.J. Vaneco had been charged and brought to trial, he might have had some small sentence. It was after all. It was a brawl on Division Street. I mean, they happen all the time.
It's a confrontation. It's not a brawl.
It's a confrontation.
But it is. You're right, Ken. That it is a drunken incident involving two groups of people.
Admittedly
And it
drunk.
might have
Admittedly
just come and
drunk,
gone
It
at
might
that
have just
point.
passed.
And what?
Misdemeanor
Yeah,
or
it could very
suspended
well
sentence.
exactly have been that, a misdemeanor, suspended sentence, whatever else it is. But instead, R.J. Vaneco's life has been probably sort of a living hell for the last 10 years, wondering what's going to happen to him. And he's probably in worse shape than if his friends hadn't attempted perhaps to protect him in some way. We don't even know if that happened, but
Right.
maybe
Sure.
it did.
I mean, there's also a strong likelihood that no matter what happens with the case and the report when it's released, that he'll then face civil suit. I mean, if Mrs. Koschman
There could be
wants
any
to
number
file a
of
suit.
things. I mean, there could be people within the police department that lose their jobs. You know, we're again having the report sealed leaves us in this kind of limbo.
Do you have any guess what the
What's
report
in the
found?
report?
Well, I mean, I can tell you
Come on, Chris,
what
you got to know.
what needs to be explained is how the cops went on vacation. What needs to be explained is how Kevin McCarthy, who was kind of the most talkative witness at first, completely, if the police reports are correct, completely lied to the cops and was allowed to get away with it for a good 2 to 3 weeks before they figured that out. There's just, who wrote the note? How did files go missing in both the police department and the state's attorney's office? There's just so many questions that these 162 pages are going to need to answer. And they interviewed more than 140 people. If you do a paragraph on each, how many pages is that right there? So there's just, we need to know if after RJ ran away, which he did, and all reports say that, who did he call? Who did he tell? Did City Hall know? Did the security detail know? So those are just
and there are just. I feel an urgency to kind of move off of this because we're down. We have 10 minutes left in the show. But another thing that I really want to encourage everybody to go to the Sun-Times and look at the relatively new website that you guys have put up that essentially a compendium of the whole thing.
Right.
And I spent way more time than I intended to sitting there rereading some of those early stories and just being amazed all over again at the interconnectedness of all of the people in this. I mean, it goes back to the that horrible incident at Grand Beach with with the Daley kids and the Vaneco kids and
Vaneco was involved in that incident.
Right, and it just goes on and on and on, and people who ended up being very high in the Daley administration and in private sector connections and everything else. Read it. It's really
I think
worth
there's
it.
one other ethical point that's important to raise here, and that, from my perspective, is, when Webb was appointed, there of course were some people grousing, he's in the collective ruling group and so on. And obviously he brought charges on Vaneco. He did do the work. He did say that you're going to find this has to do in a good portion with statute of limitations. But I do think it has to be said that his petition for the for the report to be sealed is trying to bring things back to a fairness that was missing here all the way through for Koschman and his family. And you can't say, gosh, these people got tortured or this kid got killed or whatever. Let's go get that guy. You've got to show the fairness and the proper use of the justice system once you've got it in your hands, and not allow the injustice that was done to turn it into any kind of a lynching. And as hard as that is, I think, for Mrs. Koschman and so on, I think even a thuggish member of a powerful family has a right to a fair trial. And in a way, Webb is trying to sort of teach us a lesson. I mean, others may disagree, but I think that's a point.
I think that's an excellent point. Radically changing subjects. When we were putting the show together last week, the House of Cards statement was fresh in our minds from the Pope, talking about how if the Catholic Church doesn't...
And you did say Benedict early. We have Francis now.
Did I
Benedict's
say Pope
the
Benedict?
emeritus Pope.
Oh, please.
Right.
Oh,
but we've never had two popes, so...
Oh my God. Well, anyway, apologies, Pope Francis. I know he watches online in the Vatican.
Well, apparently he watches House of Cards.
Yeah, he watches, right. So anyway, I just immediately thought we got to get Andrew Patner on the show, because I know you've spoken about these issues.
I was at Vatican II.
Yeah, you've spoken about these issues so much, and I wanted to have you on. And then, of course, this whole thing happened with the Koschman trial and all that. So anyway, here we are. Press it against the clock, as we always are. Tell me about the Chicago connection to this and our cardinal. And it appears to me, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but it appears to me that every time the Pope speaks, the cardinal says, well, here's what he really meant.
Yeah. Well, so maybe we should call them Francesco and Franny, since those are their names, and that's what Cardinal George grew up with that name. There really, in this case, is a Chicago connection, because
just like the Obama administration.
With Cardinal George, we have a Chicagoan, and the previous heads of the church came from other areas or were sent to here or from other parts of the Midwest. There's no Chicago pattern, because just look at our last three cardinals. You have Cardinal Cody, who was all Chicago in his corruption, in his step-cousin girlfriend, in his arrogance, but at the same time he was also pro-civil rights. I mean, he was that complex. And you of course had Bernardin, who was like somebody with a halo and wings and just the nicest person you could ever meet. And what irony that he's not around to see a pope who's talking what Joe Bernardin was always talking. But Francis George is from Chicago, and he's not just from Chicago. I was reminded of this the other day. I was driving to Cicero. Riccardo Muti took the Chicago Symphony Orchestra out to Cicero. Fascinating day. Sadly, the Chicago Sun-Times did not cover it. But we were driving past St. Pascal's to go around. I didn't want to go on the expressway. Remember that this is the environment that Francis George grew up in. This is the church that in 1983 had the single worst racist explosion in Chicago since the 1960s. One of the worst post-civil rights movement ever, where congregants and neighbors turned on Harold Washington and Walter Mondale, used every foul word and language imaginable. I'm not saying that that's what Francis George thinks, but that's the environment and the world that he came out of. He came, and then an injustice was done to him as a handicapped kid. That's how he wound up in this, in the Oblates of Mary Immaculate, the order that he is still a member of, and that's how he wound up schooling downstate. And he always had this sense that certain people should get sympathy. But that doesn't extend to gay people or people who criticize the church. And then you have this guy coming from Latin America, the one of the last five popes who was not at Vatican II, but who embodies it, who embodies this idea that the Pope is a pastor, that the Pope is a teacher, that the Pope is there to challenge people to think and look at themselves. And then you have Francis the Corrector, who's like, no. What he actually means is, but he's up against a Jesuit here. And I'm Jewish, but I'm very interested in the church, and I'm a big fan of many of the great things that they do. But there's a reason there's never been a Jesuit pope before.
I guess we're seeing that. Yeah.
And this guy is not. there's only so much splaining you can do for a guy who speaks. Read the long interview. If you just go to america.org, it's the Jesuit magazine, the whole interview's there. He talks about movies, he talks about music, he talks about love, friendship, family, all without notes. And that's going to be very hard for somebody who's definitely of that Benedict Ratzinger mind and who wants to dust it up with people. He wants to be in Chicago. It's very appropriate that Mark Brown is the guy who writes about him and interviews him because he wants to be there. That's also his Chicago thing.
Well, I remember reading the stories about the high-tech whatever you call those things, the furnaces that were put in to put the right color smoke out.
Black smoke and white smoke.
And I'm just thinking that maybe some of the cardinals who were there are thinking about bringing a lawsuit against that company because they obviously made a mistake. It wasn't the guy they wanted. They got the wrong guy or something.
No, it's they're just, I mean, when you talk to Francis George in person, he can be very charming, he can be very thoughtful, but there's something in him that just wants to, I think, go back to the neighborhood, and the boss is the boss.
Mark Brown wrote that there's, or said on this show, that that the Pope is bringing a new tone, and our cardinal likes the old tone. He likes the old tone better.
Absolutely.
Guys, we are getting really close on time here. I wanted to bring up this much larger question about Cornell Square Park and whether it means anything, whether it's taken things up another notch. But what do we got? About 2 minutes left? Yeah, about 2 minutes. We could take that on if you feel like it. But I think maybe a more interesting topic would be the outcome of it is our mayor and our police superintendent talking about how we need mandatory minimums for possession of an illegal firearm. Well, which, please, just take it.
Let me try to maybe tie it all together here. Just as I think the Pope is changing the narrative a little bit here, right, on a international level about the church, I think the narrative that is playing out in the wake of Cornell Square Park is very similar to the narrative that plays out after every mass shooting event. And when you look at this tighter gun control, gets politicized, doesn't pass, all these things. There maybe needs to be a little changing of the narrative in the way elected officials think about these problems. And I do think, we were talking at the beginning of the show, stories like Koschman and other stories we've done, Abadi, stories about disabled cops gaming the system potentially. Stories about cops who are convicted or accused of crimes getting to continue to serve. These all eat at the morale of the police department. And so when a mass shooting happens, Gary McCarthy stands up and Rahm stands up and says the same narrative kind of over and over again. We get calls from police officers anonymously, the overwhelming majority of them, that they're frustrated because they see the things happening in their own department. So why should that cop who's doing his job go out there and continue to bust his hump in Englewood or back of the yards when things are bad in other parts of the department? Morale is terrible.
And just to extend that one more sad step, the morale overall in the city and in the cities is terrible. But as long as a country we have a gun worship and a gun exemption, it's the cities that will continue to suffer.
It will always be in
the
city.
There's nothing that the cities can do when the nation is allowing unlimited flow of guns.
And the cities, ironically, have a much smaller voice in the United States Congress than the others.
And any city would love to have the guns gone, and we have to get them because of the NRA and the rest of the country.
I'm really so sorry that I wish we could have another hour and a half. We got so much to do. Well, we'll just let's just do it. See what'll they say, right? I know what they'll say. Don't come back next week. We want you to come back next week. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a community service of CAN TV. We're here all the time, and you can watch us right here on YouTube anytime you would like. I really want to thank Chris Fusco from the Sun-Times for being here today. Andrew Patner from WFMT. Great conversation. We'll have them both back, I hope, sometime real soon. Check us out on iTunes. See you next week. I'm Ken Davis. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.